Commemorating the 7th anniversary of the Digital India Mission, CNBC-TV18 in partnership with MasterCard hosted its marquee initiative Digital India Vision Summit in New Delhi. This annual leadership forum witnessed policymakers and industry captains sharing their visions on accelerating and optimizing the ongoing digital revolution to redefine India's decade. Mr. Nikhil Sahni, Division President South Asia at MasterCard, gave an introductory note on the role of fintech in India's decade and on why India is at the forefront of a fintech revolution.
Good evening, everyone. Dignitaries, Shireen, Koshi, Jayesh, many others in this room. Fintechs, hopefully many of them in this room. Good evening and welcome to this session. Well, if you look at India, and there have been a lot of conversations, the AV also showed some sense. So we're celebrating 75 years of independence. So if you kind of roll back, 1947, we got our political freedom. 1994, somewhere in the scheme of things, we got our economic freedom. And in 2015, when the Honorable Prime Minister launched Digital India, we took the first step of moving towards digital freedom. And that process is still underway with some rapid strides that we have made over the past many years. In fact, the last 7 years have been fascinating in terms of the amount of work that has happened in taking India digital. So truly, one of the best examples that I quote, sometime in November 21, I was traveling from Delhi to Mumbai and had a senior colleague from the US. And we were traveling in, and those were maybe tough COVID times compared to what it is today. And, the person at the security asked me for my vaccination certificate, and I showed my phone. And my senior colleague had to just look for his wallet, pull out a card and say that this is, and I said, you have physical vaccination certificates, whereas we have all digital vaccination certificates. And he was astounded. And I said that the more you proceed into India, you'll figure out that we are becoming digitally free. So I thought that was like a testimony. And now the government has enabled 2 billion vaccinations. These numbers are fairly astounding. Actually, the number of zeros that come with any number associated with India these days is rather encouraging, if I may say so. So of course, with Digital India, the launches that have recently happened, Digital India Bhashini, Shireen was referring to it. The Global Innovation in 2021 Index says that for the 11th year in a row, India is India is the best in terms of the Innovation Index, which speaks volumes about the work that we as a country have achieved. And fintechs have been at the core of it, that the Innovation Index continues to, and there have been platforms that the government has created. The UPI platform, numbers of UPI are astounding as far as we are concerned. And that has given the impetus for a lot of fintechs to come and innovate so that superior UX can be extended to customers and it becomes seamless. The platforms are indeed seamless and it's so much more easier. In the next 25 years, so if we were to say that we move into the Amrit Kal as far as India is concerned after having completed 75 years of independence, and the next 25 years that we are going to witness, and 3 foundational technologies, which will be the real talking points. One is, of course, big data and analytics. The second is, of course, cloud computing. And the third is possibly the most important, which is cybersecurity. And I'll come to some of these. Of course, we've talked about 5G and how it is going to possibly enable and further digital acceptance and digital freedom as India progresses. ONDC, which is democratizing digital commerce, truly a global first, which is being made in India. And again, there will be a whole lot of innovation, which will come around some of these initiatives that the government of India is taking, and fintechs will be at the core of it, as most of us are aware. 6,000 odd fintechs in India, having raised about $30 billion over the last many years. It's not only about the money that's been raised. The money raised is not about the wealth that gets created. It's about the innovation that comes with the wealth, the amount of jobs that are being created, the entrepreneurial spirit of the country, which is today being noticed by all and sundry across the globe. And the BFSI sector today has made rapid strides. Of course, it started with the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana in terms of getting inclusion. So we're moving from inclusion to inclusive growth. With 2014, we started with the Jan Dhan Yojana. Today, we potentially expect another 100 million people to come into the banking net over the next, 4 odd years. So, towards the end, I'd like to quote our late President, Shri APJ Abdul Kalam, who once said that a dream is not what you see while sleeping, it is something that keeps you awake all throughout. So the last 7 years have been nothing short of a dream to achieve India's digital freedom. And we are very hopeful that some of the ideas which will come over, some of the discussions that are scheduled over the next couple of hours will possibly give us a path to move towards a truly independent digital India, if I may say so. Thank you so much.
Chief guest Amitabh Kant, Sherpa G20, and the former CEO of Niti Aayog delivered his keynote address titled Charting the Roadmap to a $1 trillion Digital Economy.
So at the outset, let me compliment CNBC for its Digital India Vision 7.0. That means this program has been going on for about 7 years. Remarkable success story, and it's really been a great, I think to my mind, a great collaborative partnership with the digital initiative that Government of India has launched and the huge digital revolution that has taken place in India. So I've moved on from being CEO Niti Aayog, and I've been a long-term believer. I'm now the G20 Sherpa, which is going to be held next year, but I've been a long-term believer in digitization. I've been a long-term believer in data. I've been a long-term believer in using data for improving governance. And I've been a long-term believer in real-time ranking based on data. And one of the key programs of this government was the aspirational district program across 115 districts, where on 49 indicators we were ranking districts on real-time data, on performance of these most backward districts. They were not called backward by the Prime Minister, they were called the aspirational districts. But on 49 indicators across health, education, nutrition, we ranked them on the basis of data. We created competition, and that led to really good governance on ground. And this good governance based on data really transformed governance, because ranking of districts was available on each indicator minute by minute, hours by hours, and every district knew whether they were going up or coming down. And that competition really led to the transformation of these districts in a very big way. So I am a great believer that actually if India is to grow at rapid rates of 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, there are only two ways. And that is one, using technology to leapfrog. Many of the things that we pushed through, the production-linked incentive looked at cutting-edge areas. Quite often in India, we get into the sunset areas of growth. We don't look at the sunrise areas of growth. And India has a proven track record to lead the way, to enable all countries to actually, what India has demonstrated to the rest of the world is that you can design and implement digital public infrastructure. And that is really the key. And by doing digital public infrastructure, you can do consent-based data handling. You can actually drive growth. You can actually transform health, education, vaccination, and you can drive payments, and you can actually really create a unique model. So I think, to my mind, this is really the big story about India's digital story, that India has done something very unique. India has done something which is very different from the rest of the world. What India has done is path-breaking, and this is something where India is way ahead of the rest of the world, particularly the developed world. And this is the big digital story of India, which CNBC needs to broadcast all over the world and make the developed world emulate India in its story. Thank you very much.
Followed by the address, Amitabh Kant had a brief fireside chat with CNBC-TV18's managing editor Shireen Bhan.
I just want to take off from what you said. You said that India needs to present an alternative narrative, and we need to present an alternative to what China has done. If China's idea of expanding its influence and its presence was through physical infrastructure, India should use the digital infrastructure and the digital highway as its narrative. But in order for us to be able to do that, there will be questions asked, for instance, on the regulatory environment, on the fact that we don't have a data protection and a data privacy bill or a law at this point in time, on the fact that we have mandated data localization, whereas in most developed markets, data is free-flowing. Won't this be some of the challenges that you will have to contend with, even as you sell the digital public infrastructure story?
Yeah, Shireen, that's an important point, and the government has already, the draft bill which was ready, the government realizes this. The government has this foresight and vision to understand that you are in a world which is transforming based on data, and that therefore the government scrapped the earlier bill because it had too many recommendations from the Parliamentary Standing Committee, which had made it very in some ways a little convoluted, and the government has gone in for a fresh draft, which should be, which to my mind they've said is going to be very expeditiously done, which to my mind will be really path-breaking and transformational, very contemporary, and actually will be a world beater.
Okay, so when we take over the G20 presidency, which happens next year, and I'm sure you've already started work on putting the nuts and bolts together, how are we going to tell this story to the world? What is the narrative going to be, and what are you hopeful of in terms of objectives, in terms of milestones to be achieved at the end of that?
The way we'll do it is to get CNBC to do Digital 7.5 and broadcast the story all over the world. There'll be nobody better than Shireen to do this.
That we're already doing, and thank you very much
But
for the vote of confidence.
important thing is to create some high-level principles around it, get in discussions with the developed world, because there are two different philosophies. One is on digital public infrastructure, which India has created, which we think is really way ahead of what the European world has done. It's way ahead of what America has done, where the big tech rules. But American government is driven by big tech. And therefore, it's very important to tell them how transformational is the story of India and how it can really transform the rest of the world. And many European countries realize that this is the way forward. If you talk to European countries, many of them realize that this is the way forward, and therefore a lot of convincing, a lot of interaction, a lot of discussions will have to be held with them to take this forward.
One of the other challenges as we move more and more into a digitized world, Mr. Kant, is the fact that there should be a harmonization as far as standards are concerned. There should be a harmonization of rules and regulations. Otherwise, it's getting to be too complicated. And one would argue that perhaps the G20 could be the route to being able to achieve that. Should there be a global governance framework as far as data is concerned? Do you believe that that could be the role of the G20?
No, G20 has a very key and critical role in several areas. Building up a new financial architecture, building up a new digital architecture, looking at how climate adaptation and mitigation has to be financed, which many of the developed countries, despite commitment in COP21, have not lived up to. So those are very key issues which will be discussed, debated, and taken forward. But it's also important to understand that we are doing this, Indonesia right now is doing this in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. And there is a huge complexity because of external situations of both the war in Russia-Ukraine and the China-Taiwan crisis. So you have to bring in to be able to do transformational things, to be able to build up a completely new narrative around climate, or to be able to build to drive a completely new vision around digitization, or on accelerating the pace of sustainable development goals, much of which will be driven by digitization and data, you need a huge amount of political capital globally.
Well, Mr. Kant, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very, very much for joining us here at the Digital India Vision 7.0 Summit, and we look forward to partnering with you for the 7.5 edition of it. But always a pleasure. Sure. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Always a pleasure to be a part of this. Thanks.
We have a very ambitious program in Hyderabad, which is called Hi-Fi. We have identified 3,000 hotspots where people congregate. These are typically, let us say, the railway station, shopping malls, bus stations, tourist places, and so on. And in every such location, we have been able to provide public Wi-Fi services.
CNBC TV18, in partnership with MasterCard, hosted its marquee initiative, Digital India Vision Summit in New Delhi, where policymakers and industry captains shared their vision on accelerating and optimizing the ongoing digital revolution. Mr. Jayesh Ranjan, Principal Secretary of Industries and Commerce and Information Technology of Telangana Government, gave a special address on how Telangana envisions itself as a global leader in emerging technologies.
First of all, let me thank CNBC TV18 and MasterCard for putting together this event and for inviting state representatives to participate. Typically, when such events are held in Delhi, they become extremely Delhi-centric. You speak about national programs, you speak about national frameworks, which is fine. But we all know that the real action happens in the states, and to invite a state representative to present their perspectives is also very, very important. And I'm glad that amongst all the 28 states in our country, you are giving this opportunity to Telangana. I have been the IT secretary in Telangana for more than 7.5 years. So in a way, I have seen it all, done it all. But what I'd like to really speak about is something we have been actually doing in Telangana. So I'll speak about live examples, live experiences. Little before Digital India was launched in July 2015, actually 2 months prior to that, we launched our own program of Digital Telangana. Because Telangana, as all of you would know, is a new state. It got created in June 2014. And one of the mandates which was given to us after becoming a new state is to relook at all the existing policies, all the legacies, and come out with new frameworks, etc. So we created this template of Digital Telangana in March 2015. And when we learned about Digital India, I myself was present when Honorable Prime Minister launched it at one of the stadiums here in Delhi. I did recognize that there's lots of very strong alignment between what we have already announced and what the Digital India's goals are. But we also noticed that in certain aspects, we are much more ambitious and much more audacious than Digital India is. So let me share the 7.5 years of Digital Telangana's experience. If you have to summarize to a layman what Digital Telangana is, I would use a very simple kind of a format. Digital Telangana stands on two pillars. There's a pillar of supply, and then there is a pillar of demand. So let me speak about supply. So supply, very obviously, is about creating digital infrastructure. If you want to digitalize, if you want to penetrate every aspect of human life through digital, obviously you need to have humongous amounts of digital robust infrastructure, which really is available to the last person in the remotest of the villages. So in Telangana, we have tried to achieve this in a multiple number of ways. The most ambitious of it is what is called T-Fiber. We just saw in the AV about BharatNet, whose aim is to connect every panchayat headquarter. But in Telangana, our ambition is to provide digital connectivity through optical fiber cable to each and every household. And there are close to 7.5 million households in Telangana. And obviously, as one would imagine, many of them are remote, they are in hilly areas, they are inside forests, etc. But regardless of where you are, we are confident that we'll be able to provide optic fiber cable to everyone, every home in the state. And the confidence stems from the fact that we have already implemented very successfully a flagship program of the state government in which piped drinking water is provided to every home. In fact, Telangana is the first state which has achieved this distinction. And in doing so, we actually dug close to 150,000 kilometers of trenches. And we have very creatively used the same trenches to lay the optic fiber cable ducts as well. So lots of costs have been saved, and we have been able to therefore reach each and every household in the state. And we are in August now, towards the end of August. I'm very confident that by, let us say, February or March of the next year, every home in Telangana will have optic fiber connectivity. The second way in which we are providing digital infrastructure is, of course, through 4G. And now, of course, we are moving into 5G. I know that in the audience today are different kinds of stakeholders. There are private companies, corporates, there are academicians, there are members of the startup community. Whatever we have been successful in doing in Telangana has all been done through a partnership approach. And while we have had a very satisfactory experience all these while, but we also agree, just as Mr. Singh said, that we have a lot of ground to cover. And I would be happy if people in the room join hands with us to deliver more and more digital services, digital solutions, and ensure that the tech prowess of Hyderabad and Telangana that remains a role model for the rest of the country. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
In the next episode, policymakers come together for a power-packed discussion titled Public Digital Platforms Enabling Inclusive India Fast and Far, upon how India's unique platformization strategy is building public digital platforms across sectors.